you, Randy, and we are now recording. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming in, and welcome. I know there's quite a few more people still to come in, so I'll let them in as we go. But this is today we're talking about growing medical cannabis in the UK, and I'm introducing you to fellow forum member Melissa Sturgess, and very good friend of mine. And we've known each other for a long time. And Melissa, as you would have read in the bio, has been an entrepreneur. She's been out there in the energy space for 25 years. She will no doubt talk a little bit about that. But what we are listening in today is this very exciting new business in which she is pioneering the growing of medical cannabis within the UK. She's just left the screen.
I'm back.
There she is. Normally, Melissa and I talk about our dogs, and you can see one of her greyhounds on the sofa behind her there. But today it's medical cannabis. So okay. Melissa, welcome. I would like Simon. You, please, just to give us a little bit of background on yourself. And as you know, because we discussed this on our holiday this summer, I'm increasingly pushing and working on younger members to come into forum, particularly forum founders, people who are looking to build their businesses. So I can see one or two are on the call. It would be useful for them to just hear a little bit about your business, how you built your career, and maybe one or two tips to them, and then let's get on to onto medical cannabis, please.
So if we're hi Simon, if we're inspiring our younger members, that definitely says I'm one of your older members. So thank you for that. So my background, I'm obviously an Aussie by birth. I've been in the UK since 2006-7, and really I came up here because of my career. I wanted to educate my son here, but also I really found working in capital markets a lot better for my career than working in Australia, which is maybe some people might find interesting. My undergraduate degree, BSc, so I'm sort of a statistician, psychologist undergrad, and then MBA. Then I fell, as many West Australians do, into the metals and mining space, and found that I had a gift and really enjoyed working on the African continent, pretty much putting deals together. So putting people, projects and capital together and listing companies in the UK. Fell into cannabis in 2017-18 when there was a big dip in commodity prices. And opportunistically by nature and opportunistically in my career, I looked at what was happening in Canada and saw this incredible boom in capital markets in the cannabis space, and thought, well, that looks interesting. And that's what started the interest. And then I listed a small vehicle and raised some money. And as we're discussing tonight, we're at the point now where it looks like we're going to be able to grow commercially medical cannabis in the UK and be part of this, like 60 odd $billion industry globally, $37 billion in the illicit markets, which over the next 10 years will make its way into the mainstream market.
Good. We're going to come on to that. Let me have, because I know I've primed you on this, let me have a couple of tips.
Oh yeah.
Come on.
Look, you just have to go for it. I think if you're young and ambitious, you just have to go for it, and you have to be prepared to work longer and harder than everyone else around you, because if nothing else helps you win, certainly more hours do. So if everyone else is sleeping and you're working, you're going to get ahead. So it's really it's hard work, and it's going for it and not accepting knockbacks. You just have to keep going.
Yes. And I know we've discussed before as well, there's nothing like fear to wake you up in the morning and get you going. So,
yes.
We had a breakfast this morning actually here in London discussing the young entrepreneurship, if you like, and what it takes to be an entrepreneur. So you've certainly proved that. Now let's move on to medical cannabis. And of course we hear more and more in the mainstream press about medical cannabis. But what are its uses, and what real difference is it making? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, well, it is more and more, as you say, in the mainstream, and that's because it's gone from being.
I'm sorry. Sorry, just start there again, because for some reason you were muted. So please start that again.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as a medicine used since the beginning of time, basically. Then for many reasons, which we were discussing before this call started, it became illegal in most countries in the world. And then more recently, again, we've started to see legalization across the world. So I suppose it's something that we've already known about, some people more than others, but it's now starting to come into the mainstream, and we're seeing legalization across the world. It's probably a really good medicine for the modern world because it does so many things, which in some people's mind makes it sort of hard to grapple with, because it reduces inflammation, it reduces anxiety, it improves sleep, it improves mental focus, it makes people feel more relaxed. So apart from the idea of of getting high or getting stoned, it really has this ability to balance out lots of the body's systems via what is called the endocannabinoid system. So there is a regulating system in the body called the endocannabinoid system, which responds to cannabis. So it's sort of this fine-tuning medicine, and is being used in in MS, in childhood epilepsy, very much so in neuropathic pain. So starting to become something.
Am I right in thinking that there are about 6,000 people in the UK at the moment who are benefiting from medical cannabis? And if that's the right number, is that a big number or a small number?
Well, we're right at the beginning of it. So medical cannabis was only legalized in the UK late 2018. And then what happened was we started to build an industry around those patients. And that's what's happened in every regulated space. The early years, you see not much activity and not much patient uptake because there is no industry. So there are no prescribing doctors, there are no supply chains, and there's no product. So we started with a couple of thousand patients. Literally a couple of months ago, it was 6,000. As of today, it's nearly 10,000. We're expecting maybe 25,000 by the end of next year. So we're at sort of takeoff velocity in the UK. And as I say, pretty much exactly what we've seen in other jurisdictions.
Yeah. And I read in the Sunday papers, I think it was only last Sunday, that there are something like 26,000 children in the UK who with drug-resistant epilepsy. So but then all those the BPNA I was reading about, they've taken a fairly firm stance on that, and so it's very divisive and very emotional, isn't it? Because you've got all these particularly when you're talking about kids, and they can't get what clearly they need. It's very emotional. So how is the media going to deal with that, and how's the government dealing with it as well?
Well, I think it's a really good point, Simon, because what we've seen in the UK is legislation and regulations change in response to this groundswell of patient pressure, and certainly in terms of children, the parent pressure. So that has really helped things move along, and we saw legalization probably faster than any of us expected in 2018 because of that pressure. So I think the childhood issue is really key. I must say, I understand if you're a specialist clinician and you're used to prescribing pharmaceutical drugs, that the idea of prescribing cannabis, which has all sorts of other connotations for many people, to children, can be seen to be sort of quite out there. So it's education, it's time, and it's providing patients with really high quality medical cannabis that clinicians can get get comfortable with.
So tell us now, what is just simple for the layman like myself, what is the difference between medical cannabis and recreational cannabis and CBD?
Okay, so let's start. CBD is really in the wellness space, and that actually in the UK is considered a food. It's sort of a food additive, nutraceutical type thing, and that is made to certain completely different regulations, and it has to have a trace amount of THC in it to be sold. So that's the Holland and Barrett over-the-counter pharmacy type product.
Okay.
Then recreational,
and the public generally don't have a problem with that. So there's
still some people. Yeah, some people still say, "Oh, is that going to make me high? Can I take it if I'm driving?" So there's still, and I must say, Brits more than anywhere else in the world, probably not interestingly, probably we would expect it, that Brits like to know a little bit more. They sort of say, well, hang on a minute, I want to understand this a little bit more before I use it. Then you go into the medical cannabis and the recreational cannabis. Really, one of the main differences, one is legal and one's illegal. So that's where we're seeing the early patient numbers in the UK is we are seeing people coming from the illicit market into the legal prescribed market. So that's where this first patient rush is coming from. There are a lot of people who've been self-medicating.
Okay, so because I know, when we've spoken before, by the way, Melissa and I and our respective families, we were all on holiday, so we had lots of talks about this. But the markets, you talked about Canada, and that's where you first came across the idea. I know you spent a lot of time in Israel. Now we've got one or two people from Canada on the call, and quite a few people from America on the call, from the US.
Yeah.
So just take us through where those respective countries are in terms of not only their attitude towards medical cannabis, but also just in terms of how far advanced they are. And are they that much more advanced than we are in the UK?
Probably in terms of years, yes. So they're years ahead of us. But in terms of thinking around medical cannabis, we're all sort of starting to think along the same lines. Obviously, in the UK, we haven't seen the recreational aspect open up at all, which we're starting to see now across a lot of states in the US. The US market, medical cannabis market's worth about $7 billion at the moment, and it's growing at, I think it's like 15% year on year. The Canadian market also very big. There are structural challenges because of federal illegality in the US and state by state regulations change. So we are going through sort of growing pains, I suppose, in the industry. So we've seen this sort of big land grab. We've seen a lot of activity in capital markets. We're now seeing some M&A and consolidation work. I think the UK will build in a really organized, disciplined way, because that's what the UK tends to do. It tends to be quite, maybe a little bit slower, but very deliberate in opening up. And that's what we're seeing to date. We're seeing regulations, and then we're seeing the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, which regulates us in capital markets, starting to make very positive, supportive statements about being open for business in capital markets for cannabis. So this is an industry that's here to stay. It's not going anywhere.
Yes, no, absolutely. And so, but in the UK, back to the UK again, if we may, is it private sector led, or where? I'm assuming it is private sector led, but where does the NHS stand on this? And that must be the all important card for you.
Yeah, well, sort of yes and no, because so the NHS now technically can prescribe, but there are very few prescriptions being made on the NHS. What is happening in the UK, and it's my personal view from the people I speak to, is that the NHS is perhaps happy to see the private sector lead the way. So at the moment, all the prescriptions you're seeing, the patient numbers that you're seeing, that's really all happening in the private space. So private clinicians through medical cannabis clinics are prescribing medical cannabis for neuropathic pain and other indications, and they can now get insurance. So clinicians can get themselves insured to prescribe medical cannabis. So we expect for the next few years for the private sector to lead the way, and then we expect the NHS will start to participate. And maybe that's just economics. Maybe the NHS just needs to see that actually clinicians will be prescribing medical cannabis instead of something else that's already costing the NHS money. Whereas at the moment, they see cannabis as something that would be prescribed in addition to the medicines that are already being taken. So it's going to happen, Simon. But I think it's a bit of a red herring to be obsessed about the NHS. This industry, is growing. I mean, I'm staggered that it was 2,000 patients, then it was 6,000. Now it's 9,500. It's really growing rapidly.
Yeah. Okay, very interesting. Thank you for that. And so, by the way, I'm very keen for people to ask questions. On the screen, I can see both John McCormick and David Lewis here, and I'm wondering whether I might bring you in at some point. I know that medical cannabis is not exactly what you do, but with regard to an analogous sector. So maybe you might come in, and I'll ask you to put up your hand, but just for the moment, I wanted to go on, Melissa, and just ask you, because again, we spoke about earlier about, is it Jazz Pharmaceuticals, who have spent a
Yes.
huge sum of money buying
Yeah.
GW? And so
Yeah.
why have they done that? And are they, is this just purely UK based? Tell me more.
Well, that sort of really got the market here quite excited at the beginning of this year. We had, in capital market terms, we sort of had, the perfect storm. So we had the Financial Conduct Authority come out and say, yes, we're open for business. Come and list your businesses here. We're happy for people to raise money in medical cannabis. We saw Jazz buy GW for $7.5 billion. I can't remember if it was pounds or dollars. It doesn't really matter. It's quite a lot of money. And we saw a couple of small, not that small, sort of $50 million raises in the UK markets. So that Jazz acquisition, I think that put cannabis sort of really on the map from a UK perspective. We've all known that GW Pharmaceuticals has been growing cannabis in the UK, and it's grown for the pharmaceutical sector. So they have 2 pharmaceutical drugs with FDA approvals that called Sativex and Epidiolex. So the cannabis has been grown for those drugs. But yeah, I mean, it's a big ticket. It shows you that medical cannabis can be grown in the UK. It shows you that we can build a very large industry over here. I mean, it shows you that everything is possible and that the prize is very, very big from, if you're an investor.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And just before we come on to the questions, because I see there are a few in the bar here, which is terrific. Ananda, which is your vehicle, just give us the latest update on Ananda and where you're at, because you gained your license in May, I think it was.
Yeah.
And you're one of the first, if not the first, I'm not sure, but one of the first companies to hold a UK license to grow medical cannabis. So what are your next steps?
Well, so the first part of the license that we hold at the moment is a research license. And yes, there are very few. Freedom of information doesn't disclose how many there are approved that have been granted. We think we're one of not very many. Certainly our research plan, which is to grow and stabilize up to 65 strains of cannabis to create a library of sort of proprietary genetics. And then put these into the field to trial, grow them, as they would be grown on a commercial scale. I'm not sure that anyone else is doing that side of things. So we got approval to do that in May. We are flat out building the facility at the moment. So that's sort of day and night. We once that facility is built, we plant our seeds and we start the genetic work, which is really stabilizing these strains. So it's sort of a genetic back crossing program. And then we will go back to the Home Office and start a conversation about transitioning to commercial growing. But the research part is really important, getting the right genetics and getting stable genetics so that you have a good, healthy flower plant that does what it needs to do.
Okay. So Paul Neuter, I see you there in sunny Georgia. Can I ask you to unmute yourself and come forward with your question?
Yeah, did I do that? Yeah, it looks like I got it. Yeah, for what condition is it generally used?
A lot of pain, Paul. So the biggest prescribing in the UK is pain, anxiety, they're the sort of the 2 main ones, and then a small amount for epilepsy and other indications, sort of inflammatory indications.
All right, let me have part 2 of that question. What other compounds does it replace?
I'm not sure what you mean by.
In other words, what other drugs, pharmaceuticals, are used if this had not come along that are currently being used?
I think probably one of the big ones is the opioids. So I think opioids, and then I think what we're finding is that medical cannabis will do things that none of the other drugs are really able to achieve. And it's as I said at the beginning, it's really quite interesting because it creates sort of an improvement in overall balance. So, for example, the research at the moment is showing that if you're taking cannabis for pain, for example, you might say that your pain score drops from 8 out of 10 to 5 out of 10. So it might not drop completely, but what will happen is your sleep score will improve, your anxiety score will improve. And you then start to exercise a bit more because you're feeling better about yourself. So you'll go out, and so then you lose a bit of weight. So what tends to be reported, which is very challenging for the medical and the specialist community, is you get a quality of life improvement. So you get an overall quality of life improvement, which if you just were to look at the one indication, you might say, well, if your pain has gone from 8 to 5, is that really worth it? But actually everything else that is benefiting is so massive that the overall impact is really significant.
Mm-hmm. And John, you're sitting there. Can I ask you to unmute yourself and maybe come forward with some of your views on this?
Well, more questions than views. We've talked a lot about efficacy here, right? Yeah. Where it works. But the other form of testing, for example, that the United States Food and Drug Administration does is safety, yeah. Right? So harms. Talk about the harms of cannabis, and it would be really interesting to hear you compare it to legal compounds such as tobacco and alcohol. That'd be really interesting for me.
Yeah, I'll probably avoid those because I sort of tend to not get into comparing and contrasting with those other sort of illicit, those are the drugs and the alcohol type argument. In terms of safety, so much research suggests that it is really safe. I think if you talk about what we consider or what we're worried about, well, maybe I should speak for myself. What I'm worried about is something in the UK, I don't know what you call it in the US, we call it skunk, which is basically ultra high THC cannabis, which has been grown specifically to get high. What tends to happen in medical cannabis plants is you have a much better balance between the different compounds. So there are already known 140 cannabinoids. So there's CBD, there's THC. They're the two that we talk about. There's CBN, there's CBG, there's CBC, there's CBA. So there are 140 known cannabinoids, and there are also a whole range of other molecules in the plant called terpenes and flavonoids, which all have their own impact and they're all their own effect. And they work together in synergy. So there is a synergistic impact of this plant. So in terms of safety, when that is being prescribed, there's hardly any instance of psychosis. It's interesting, I want to chat today, and there's one lady talked about some small piece of research that she's read, and she's a clinician, about psychosis in one patient, but the numbers of psychosis, which is the thing that people worry about with cannabis, very, very low. And in fact, normally they're finding that patient would have had some bent towards psychosis before they started taking cannabis anyway. So the psychosis and the getting high is really associated with these plants that are completely out of balance in terms of THC. And I'm totally, I'm very anti that. For example, the strains that we're looking to stabilize some of them are slightly higher in THC, but you're looking at sort of 20% THC, 5% CBD and other cannabinoids. A lot of balanced strains are very popular, for want of a better word, with patients and clinicians. So, equal amounts of CBD and THC. And in fact, more recent research is showing that actually to get the result of the cannabis or the benefit of the cannabis, you don't need THC at all. So this is what's starting to come out of Israel. So there's a clinician we follow, a researcher called Dr. Dedi Mary, who I think is the world leading authority. He's actually analyzing the plant at the molecular level and working out exactly what molecule is doing what and what molecules you need in what ratio to do what. And he is suggesting that what is happening in Israel, for example, is that people are only taking THC cannabis because that's all that's grown. So if you actually start to offer patients flour or oil that has no THC in it, they're still getting the pain relief, they're still getting the anxiety relief. So it's really early days, but from a safety perspective, and I talk to parents of epileptic children and the frankly horror stories about what gets pumped into their kids. I think I'd be giving my kid cannabis, I'd be trying cannabis when I listen to some of the stuff that gets pumped into them. Yeah.
Okay. And Baker, I see you there. And you, is there a question that you'd like to put forward, Baker? Can you unmute yourself?
Question on the UK final, or probably progressing towards recreational. As an investor in the US and owning licenses now in dispensaries, it's shocking that to me that the thing we've seen most is that the baby boomers, especially the upper class baby boomers, are the largest consumer in our dispensaries in Florida and in Massachusetts. And their thesis is, because we've done surveys now, is that it's a superfood, it's anti-inflammatory. They'd rather, instead of drinking in their 70s or 80s where they're causing cancer and destroying their organs and brain, marijuana is showing to actually be a healant. Is the progression of that in the EU, that where maybe there's more laid back laws in the UK right now? Are we seeing that on the other side of the pond, or?
No, we're a long way from that. Yeah, we're still getting our heads around medical. I don't think we're going to see the recreational market here for a while. I mean, I could be wrong. I didn't see the legalization of medical in 2018. I thought it was a couple of years away, and then it was just there. But certainly there's pressure. There are pressure groups. There are political pressure groups formed as well. So it's on the radar. It's being discussed, but I think we've got a way to go yet. You know, the UK is being really particular about the way that it introduces medical cannabis. It's really taking a very cautious approach.
And then the second question I have is on CBG, that I think still in the US is at $59,000 a gram because it's so hard to extract. And it is proven, I think, in most clinical studies to really be a great fight against cancer. I know the UK had a couple deals going on last year trying to synthesize it through DNA harvesting. Have we seen any tech to make it cheaper? Have we seen any technologies progress there? Because I haven't studied it since COVID hit. But
no, CBG is just starting to sort of be on the radar in the UK, and I think from a cancer perspective, I tend to look to see what Dedi Mary's doing in the US. So if you're interested in cannabinoid research in the cancer space, that's his actual speciality, and he's now starting to identify. Well, actually, he has identified 3 cannabinoids in the right combination that, put in a petri dish with one particular form of cancer, I can't remember which one, will kill those cancer cells. So he's making
breast tissue cancer.
Yeah. Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
So he's that guy. CBG here, it's really interesting because I was talking to one of the clinicians recently, because when we've been deciding about, well, what strains, what genetic profile do we look for when we start to do our stabilization work? And everyone says, CBG, CBG, CBG. And so I was talking to a clinician and I said, well, okay, if we were to look at a strain and, how much CBG should we be ideally thinking about having in that strain? And he said, I just couldn't even tell you. We just don't know enough yet. So just some CBG is sort of where we're at now. In terms of the price, yes, look, one of the things that we're really focused on is developing proprietary strains that work in our environment that will be high CBG, for example, so that we can create APIs more easily. I mean, it's sort of, being a mining person, it's sort of like a processing plant in the mining space, isn't it? You stick your ore in one end and then you've got a basket of metals. And what you need to know is, for example, you might have a platinum, a PGM basket, and you might have 10% rhodium, but actually in terms of the value of the basket, it's the highest value part of the plant. So we need to think about all of those things and start to think about, do we need to be growing plants that enable us to have a larger proportion of these rarer cannabinoids as they become better known? I think, that's a really interesting way to look at growing.
Thank you. We will hit the clock there, but David, did I ask you earlier, is there a point that you'd like to come in with there, David Lewis?
Yeah, it's really, hi Melissa.
Hiya.
It was really the question that who regulates this if it becomes acceptable to legal to sell it for medical purposes? How are there sort of massive regulatory hurdles that you have to get through? I mean, it's slightly what John was saying about the safety angle, but
Yeah.
I mean, in my business, the regulations, whether it's FDA or the UK, European equivalent, I mean, it's just, you have to jump through all sorts of hoops. And will it be the same worldwide, or is it just going to be each jurisdiction will have to make its own rules?
Yeah, well, at the moment, we're seeing each jurisdiction make their own rules, and then I suppose we see an upping of standards in one jurisdiction, then everyone has to meet that standard, so they up their game. From the UK perspective, we're dealing with the Home Office. It's the Misuse of Drugs Act. So, it is illegal unless the Home Secretary tells you can do it, and the Home Secretary's told us we can do it. So that's the sort of main bit of legislation that we deal with. And then it's the Medicines Health Regulatory Agency, the MHRA, that they will then look at us from a GMP perspective, so good manufacturing practice, if we're harvesting flower, turning it into oil, bagging it as flour that can be vaped. And then you're sort of looking at the growing side of things, which is your good agricultural collection practices, and so all of your sort of agricultural type disciplines. So yeah, there's a bag of stuff to focus on, but again, sort of my background's Africa and mining, and so complex jurisdictions and regulations is sort of okay, and in the UK you work diligently. We've got an absolute best-in-class team, and you just work your way through it. I think the prize is so big that it's just worth getting on, and we're ticking the boxes.
So Melissa, thank you so much. I've seen you firsthand get that table in a restaurant, which is completely impossible. So I know that I know that you'll get through all the regulations. Thank you very much indeed for explaining that to us today. Thank you all you guys for tuning in, especially all around the world. That's terrific. And we'll be back in touch very soon. And let us know how you're progressing with Ananda, and maybe there'll be one or two forum members out there that might like to know a little bit more.
Yeah, very happy to chat to anyone at any time.
All right, very good. Well, you can feed that dog behind you now. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. All right. Good to see you. And thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Simon. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye. Bye.